I want to talk about the aftermath of the assassination, especially the reaction from the right. We are recording this a week after the assassination. What do you make of the rage and declarations of war coming from MAGA influencers and media figures and politicians as well on the right, compared to other moments like Butler or 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the level of rage and this desire for revenge is really really high, and I'd say like even more so than Butler or perhaps even the election loss in 2020. Although I mean they did January 6th then, right? So
Right.
It's there. I think there's a real desire for revenge. I'm seeing people say there's a lot of kind of distractions going on. I think the right is a little unclear about which direction it wants to go in. I feel like there's sort of a sense almost of, I think they really wanted the suspect to turn out to be like a blue-haired social justice warrior type.
Mm.
And even though, we're seeing these police statements, these messages that suggest, he was coming from some sort of like LGBT rights point of view from what we've seen so far. I think it's still like a little muddled, that people seem kind of mad about it. And so to that effect, we're seeing people like Steve Bannon, a lot of really prominent Republican figures say, there has to be more to this story. The FBI has to be covering something up. Nevertheless, I think the Trump administration is very focused on the goal here, which is using this as sort of a pretext to do some kind of like Viktor Orban style crushing of left-wing institutions.
And it does seem like they were planning that long before this happened. And I mean, I guess I think Stephen Miller said that like Charlie Kirk's last text to him was, you got to go after these radical left NGOs or something to that effect.
There's a lot of people who are saying, Charlie Kirk's last wish to me was insert my policy goal, here. But you're right. I mean, even before this happened, obviously the Trump administration was going after universities or liberal law firms, things like this, cowing media companies. But I do think here that they really see an opportunity. I mean, we saw Pam Bondi saying, we're going to have hate crimes. We're going to pursue these hate crimes. So I think there's this effort. It's still a little vague at this point. I mean, we're seeing people even kind of emerging from right-wing media to say like, well, I've come up with a way that you could go after George Soros. We saw JD Vance complaining he's going to pursue whoever funds The Nation magazine because they wrote an unflattering article about Charlie Kirk. I mean, so I think it's still really early days in terms of what they would get up to. But I mean, it's obviously very disturbing, the language they're using.
I was talking about the Bannon thing again, because it was interesting to me, once they read the texts yesterday when they charged him between the killer and his romantic partner, and then they put out the charging document. It was the evidence is there for everyone to see. There's a little bit of a horseshoe theory thing going on where like there are some folks on the left who are like, the texts aren't real, they doctored the texts. And then you also got that from Steve Bannon and some folks on the right that they're not real because they want it to be, the right wants it to be a larger conspiracy than just one person. And the left doesn't, want it to be someone who has, progressive views on LGBT issues. Can you talk about some of the other conspiracies? Well, also that conspiracy, but also some of the other conspiracies on the right that have popped up around Charlie Kirk's assassination? Because I also know there's like an Israel thing going on.
Yeah, the Israel thing is really hot right now. I mean, basically, I think the key thing to understand here is that the support for Israel is sort of like maybe along with Jeffrey Epstein, although even that is kind of fading away. I think a lot of young Republicans have kind of decided that they're cool with hiding what's ever in the files about Trump. But I think that Israel is sort of like the dividing line in sort of the young MAGA movement and in right-wing media more broadly. And so you're seeing even initially after the assassination, there were people saying, whose issue is, they're always critical of Israel. And they're saying, well, maybe it was the Mossad. It looked like a professional hit, whatever. But now we're seeing, and I'm writing about this in my newsletter. I mean, it's sort of in the past few days, it's become sort of an omni feud. It's like the right is aflame. I mean, Charlie Kirk, as far as I know, hasn't even been buried. We haven't had the funeral. And yet we're seeing this just like there's this scrabbling for control of his legacy. And so you see people like Candace Owens, who is friends with him and is very anti-Semitic. You're seeing Tucker Carlson, who's very critical of Israel. Megyn Kelly, who's like weirdly, I think she sees which way the wind is blowing and she's jumped on the Israel critical train. they're all saying, or they're, Charlie he was getting mad about Israel. He was starting to voice his concerns. And then these donors, Tucker Carlson was saying these donors were really giving him heat. They wanted Tucker Carlson banned from Turning Point conferences. I mean, and that's true. But there's like a huge amount of drama related to like, what does the legacy of Charlie Kirk really mean? Who has a claim to it? And really, I mean, also who's going to control Turning Point USA?
Right. I mean, but I think Tommy brought this up on Pod Save America, but that like the conspiracies about Israel being involved reached such a fever pitch that like Netanyahu was asked about it.
Yeah, Netanyahu was asked about it, and he said, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's also like a weird thing at play here where the Netanyahu is like incredibly involved in the American right-wing podcast scene. And so he's like meeting with people like Tim Pool. He clearly cares it's like you're launching military attacks in all these different countries. Yeah. And you're meeting with the Nelk boys. In this case, Tucker Carlson seems to have been very offended that Netanyahu talked about, Charlie Kirk's devotion to Israel and felt that, the Kirk legacy was being hijacked. I mean, Carlson brought this up with JD Vance when they were like kind of filling in on the Charlie Kirk show, or JD Vance was. And so, I mean, this is like a really live issue. Bill Ackman's been pulled into it because Candace Owens has claimed he was threatening Charlie Kirk over Israel. So and again, I mean, we are talking a week after this shocking, bloody assassination. And so I think there are a lot of people on the right who are sort of shocked by like the scrabbling for advantage that's already taking place.
One other thing that's happening on the right after Trump and Vance and Bondi have all come out and said they're doing this crackdown is much like after when the Epstein thing blew up, you have some people, some MAGA figures saying, what is this attack on free speech? I don't like this. And criticizing Bondi for it. How do you see that? Is that like do you think that has some staying power? Do you think it'll be like Epstein where, a week later when they just go after some left-wing free speech, they're going to be like, oh no, that's okay, we're back on board? Or do you think there are figures on the right who are so deeply invested in free speech that they are going to continue criticizing this administration?
I think it may be like the Epstein thing in that I think some qualms will continue to persist for sort of the Trumpian grassroots or conservatives or sort of Trump-leaning independents, people who are saying, this isn't really what America was about. On the other hand, I think these right-wing media figures, like with Epstein, will fall in line. I mean, they're really thirsty for some kind of like a show trial or some kind of crackdown that destroys at least a couple, liberal nonprofits, something like that. I think Pam Bondi's mistake was phrasing it in a way that Republicans have been taught to fear hate crime laws or hate speech laws. And so they said, whoa, wait, that's about us maybe. Whereas, one Maha guy I follow, I thought it was funny. He was saying, whoa, hate speech. Let's not talk. That's not American. We want purges. We want roundups. I mean, they are seeing, they want like there's like, it's like that's a trigger phrase for them. And they don't like that. They want things like, I mean, we saw Laura Loomer say, Trump said he wants to be dictator. And I think, that might be a good idea. I mean, there's a sense that they have a lot of political capital, but there's a bit of a disagreement about how to use it.
When Vance was hosting Charlie Kirk's podcast, he said, quote, "It's a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left." You're an expert in extremism. Does it seem like a statistical fact?
I mean, as someone who has made his career covering many people who that could be classified as lunatics, I would say the right has more than its fair share.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting when he went on to say, sure, we have some crazies on our side of the aisle. Of course we do. I was going to be like, someone should ask him a follow-up on that one. See if he can say anyway.
Well, I think someone pointed out that, amid this Republican complaint about, calling Donald Trump Nazis, et cetera, that JD Vance obviously once, I believe, called Trump a Nazi or Hitler before making his MAGA turn.
Sure did. And RFK Jr., I think, too. So we're learning more about the shooter. We learned some from authorities on Tuesday. I think there was some thought on the left early on that the killer might be part of the Groyper movement. This does not seem to be the case now, but just for people to understand this, what is a Groyper? Where did these theories come from? which are now, I think, gone, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I hope this day would never come that I would have to explain to the offline audience what a groiper is. But yeah, I mean, groiper. So people remember Pepe the Frog.
Yeah.
So followers of Nick Fuentes and sort of general like Gen Z racists online around 2018, they got sort of a version of Pepe the Frog who was like a fatter toad, and he would hold his kind of look like this. He would sort of suspend his hands looking very smug. And that's groiper. And so they started to call themselves groipers. And so the idea is you're a hardcore Nick Fuentes follower. And as I mentioned, there was this thing where Nick Fuentes, I mean, up until the assassination, Nick Fuentes was very critical of Charlie Kirk. He was saying, that this guy is a real nemesis of the groipers. And so after the assassination, I think a lot of people on the left, not unreasonably, I think thought, well, maybe it was a groiper. But really, there's really no evidence of that. I mean, people point to this, how he dressed up as this Slavic squat meme, and people say, well, that's a Pepe thing. It's not really a Pepe thing. I mean, you can really get into the weeds on that, but I really just, even before we saw the messages between the roommate and the suspect, I really just think there's basically zero evidence. And I think it was a lot of, look, I don't blame people on the left for like really hoping, after this happened, that it was someone on the right, because we're seeing the Trump administration use this as a pretext to seemingly criminalize like half of politics. But, I do think, having gone through the evidence we have, I just don't think it's there. And
the engravings on the bullets, that was another thing that people were trying to go one way or the other, or trying to figure out ideology. What do you know? I mean, groiper or not, what do you know from sort of your coverage of these right-wing spaces, whether it's on Discord, whether it's gamers, wherever else, where the places are where they overlap with either, far left views, or maybe just people who are nihilist in nature or anarchists? Like, what are the corners of the internet where you might find people who it may be hard to tell what their actual ideological alliance is?
Yeah, I mean, these are worlds that are very awash in memes, in irony, sort of triple, quadruple layers of irony. A lot of video game talk. I mean, for example, like some of the messages on the bullet casings were from the game Helldivers 2. Well, I think people took that, well, that's a groiper favorite. I mean, that's like a popular game. I have that game. There's nothing sinister specifically about that game. And so I think, we're talking about like places like 4chan, Discord obviously has figured prominently here, which is sort of like Slack for people who are too young to have jobs, perhaps. And it's, you chat with your gamer buddies, as we've seen from the chat logs from the Discord, the suspects Discord that have come out. It's a lot of kind of like just shooting the shit with your pals, and then suddenly this suspect says, by the way, I shot Charlie Kirk. And so I think a lot of the confusion about the suspect's motives, admittedly, there hasn't been a ton to go on, particularly up until the indictment yesterday. But I think a lot of the confusion, it's just, I think a lot of it is just kind of like young male internet culture in terms of the memes that I think are pretty inscrutable for people outside of it.
You mentioned this earlier, but I just want to follow up before we go. What do you think happens to Turning Point? And is there some kind of inter-MAGA struggle for who takes over and the direction it heads? Or
this is like maybe like the biggest issue facing right-wing media and even the Trump administration, for the next couple months. I mean, I think obviously there's been understandably an effort there's been a lot of focus on Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk. There's no like clear successor. I mean, there are people who sort of came up under him, like Benny Johnson, Candace Owens, although she's not coming back, but she's almost, as I said, she's kind of doing her own parallel claim to his legacy. But I think ultimately, I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars, tons of young activists. And I think a lot is going to shake out. I'm hearing grumblings about this big stadium memorial service, who's getting speaking engagements, whatever. But I think, to be frank, I think there's a possibility that this organization is kind of adrift. And, perhaps some donors are going to step up and assert it. But a lot of that, it's like, you can have a lot of money, but, are you going to bring that Charlie Kirk audience? Are you going to have that credibility? And the last thing I would add here is like, it's very closely watched who is getting close to Turning Point in the aftermath here. For example, Ben Shapiro broadcast from Charlie Kirk's studio earlier this week with kind of the Daily Wire gang. And obviously he's very pro-Israel. And so this has been taken as a sign of, oh no, Israel's taking over Turning Point USA. We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene, insane. She says, this is a Christian... This is a Christian organization. We can't allow another religion to take it over. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I'm going on here, but like there's a lot of religion stuff at play here too, specifically because Charlie Kirk was a Protestant. And so you have Candace Owens really randomly basically saying not only was he about to become critical of Israel, but he was also really close to converting to Catholicism. And so, you know, there's this Jewish aspect as well. And so there's just like a lot of tension and kind of back and forth about what it meant to be Charlie Kirk and what he would have wanted.
Yeah, I mean, look, I put this the right way. Obviously, a lot of the people in that movement who knew Charlie Kirk and were close to him are devastated by this. It also seems like it's only been a week, and this assassination is being seen by many people on the right and within the MAGA movement as a way to, like you said, stake their claim to his legacy or do something that they had wanted to do previously, or make a point and an argument they were trying to make previously. And it makes me wonder about like how the legacy plays out and sort of like the staying power of the sort of unified rage that they feel right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people on the right who would prefer to see this used as some kind of quasi-fascist crackdown, who are getting very frustrated with the Israel critics who are saying, you know, like, this is our chance to arrest George Soros or something on some pretext, and you guys are making it about Gaza and Netanyahu, and you're kind of like taking oxygen out of our scheme. I mean, this is, and people are saying this like quite explicitly. They're like, this is our chance to crush the left. What are you doing? And you know, ultimately, I think this can seem a little kind of factional and like, why are we so focused on these internecine fights? But I mean, this is a lot of this is the Trump administration. I mean, a lot of this is sort of the future of politics here. And so I think you have these big personalities bumping up against each other in this like incredibly emotionally charged moment.
You were just watching a portion of my interview with Will Sommer. You can watch the full interview over at the Offline YouTube channel. Go subscribe to that if you haven't already. And please subscribe to the Pod Save America YouTube channel if you haven't already. Pretty easy. Just hit the subscribe button. It's free, and it helps elevate the content that we put out for all you wonderful people. So thank you.